Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Asto Tara Satta Sri Srimad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sikaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopi Nath Shama Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Navadvip Dham Ki Jai Ganga Mai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Tosara
Jai.
Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai
Jai.
Gaura Premanandi.
Hare Hare.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone. The Srimad Bhagavatam class. We continue our study of the first canto. We are on chapter 17, and today we have texts 26 and 27. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Okay, so since there's two verses, I'll chant just one time the verse 26, and then I'll chant three times verse 27, and then you all can also chant. So 26. Iyam cha bhumir bhagavata nyasitaru bhara sati Srimad bhistat pada nyasai sarvata krita kautuka. Translation. The burden of the earth was certainly diminished by the personality of Godhead and by others as well. When he was present as an incarnation, all good was performed because of his auspicious footprints. And 27. Shochacha shru kala sadvi durbhag evojita sati Abramanya nripa vyaja shudra bokshanti mam iti shochatyashru kala sadvi durbhage vojita sati Abrahmanya nripa vajja Shudra bokshanti mam iti shochatyashru kala sadvi durbhage vojita sati abramanya nripa vyaja shudra bokshanti mam iti. Please chant.
Socyat ashrukala sadvi durbhage vojhita sati abhramanya nrupavyaja shudra bhokshanti mamiti.
Sotyatyastu kalasadvi durbhagye vojjita sati abhrammanyan ripa vyaja sudra bhokshanti mam iti. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Rochatyashro Durga Jevojita Shati Abramanyani Pava Vidyaha Shudra Vakshanti Mamiti.
शोच्यत्य श्रुकला साध्वी दुर्भगे वो जिता सती अब्राह्मण्या नृपव्याजः शूद्रा भोक्षयन्ति मामिति.
Anyone else? Okay. Shochati, lamenting. Ashru kala, with tears in the eyes. Sadhvi, the chaste. Durbhagha, as if the most unfortunate. Eva, like. Ujjhita, forlorn. Sati, being so done. Abramanya, devoid of Brahminical culture. Nripa Vyajaha, posed as the ruler. Shudraha, lower class. Bhokshanti, would enjoy. Mam, me. Iti, thus. Translation. Now, this is Maharaj Parikshit speaking, and this is actually the end of his speaking in this particular section. This iti at the end here, which is always translated as thus, because it means thus, but it also can mean it's the end of a quote. So we'll see that this is the end of his quotation, and then the narration will come again. So Maharaj Parikshit speaking. Now she, the chaste one, being unfortunately forsaken by the personality of Godhead, laments her future with tears in her eyes, for now she is being ruled and enjoyed by lower class men who pose as rulers. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Kshatriya, or the man who is qualified to protect the sufferers, is meant to rule the state. Untrained lower class men, or men without ambition to protect the sufferers, cannot be placed on the seat of an administrator. Unfortunately, in the age of Kali, the lower class men without training occupy the post of a ruler by strength of popular votes, and instead of protecting the sufferers, such men create a situation quite intolerable for everyone. Such rulers illegally gratify themselves at the cost of all comforts of the citizens, and thus the chaste mother, Earth, cries to see the pitiable condition of her sons, both men and animals. That is the future of the world in the age of Kali, when irreligiosity prevails most prominently. And in the absence of a suitable king to curb irreligious tendencies, educating the people systematically in the teaching of Srimad Bhagavatam will clear up the hazy atmosphere of corruption, bribery, blackmail, etc. So today's two verses again, first 26. The burden of the earth was certainly diminished by the personality of Godhead and by others as well. When he, Krishna, was present as an incarnation, all good was performed because of his auspicious footprints. Now she, the chaste one, Mother Earth, being unfortunately forsaken by the personality of Godhead, laments her future with tears in her eyes, for now she is being ruled and enjoyed by lower class men who pose as rulers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminate Namane Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pacharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarne Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnana Jnana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna, welcome again. I have to rearrange my windows one moment. Okay. So today, as fate would have it, we are going to speak again about lower class men who pose as rulers. This is directly from the text, lower class men who pose as rulers. This topic comes up a lot, especially in this last section, of course, but anytime basically Varnashram comes up, this also comes up. The results of people not following Varnashram properly. What happens when lower class men who don't have the qualification of a Kshatriya pose as rulers or occupy the posts of a ruler? And so Srila Prabhupada pointed this out in the purport, why this is not beneficial for anyone, right? So again, I talk about this a lot. It is a severe problem. The nature of a Kshatriya, as Srila Prabhupada pointed out right in the beginning of the purport, is he has the tendency to protect others. He has the ambition to protect others. So this is based not on what family he was born in, but based on his just natural tendency, his character. And that, of course, is dictated by the modes of material nature, which is based on previous karma, right? So there are three modes of nature, and in the Bhagavad Gita we read that they're always competing with one another to take prominence in each material body, and what effects they have on us. And so one who is primarily influenced by the mode of goodness, he is a Brahmana by quality, and he's able to understand that everything is provided by the Supreme Lord, right? So he has no need to go out and get anything for himself, no need to try to collect funds, no need to, make himself a shelter, no need for any of that. He understands Krishna will provide, right? Strictly, pardon me, strictly mode of goodness, right? So no ambition whatsoever to do anything aside from read the Shastra and then present that Shastra to others, right? Give counsel to others based on Shastra without any attachment whatsoever. He gives advice based on Shastra. If the people follow the advice, that's good, then, everything will thrive. If they don't, well, that's also their choice, right? This is the position of a Brahmana, mode of goodness. Then there's also mode of passion, right? So when mode of passion is prominent, then there is this ambition, right? To do something, this tendency to want to do something. So the Kshatriyas, they're primarily mode of passion. Now the good Kshatriyas, they understand that they should take counsel from the Brahmanas because the Brahmanas know the absolute truth. They can give sound advice to the Kshatriyas, and then the Kshatriyas can use their ambition to create a pleasant atmosphere, not just pleasant materially, but a suitable atmosphere where people can thrive both materially and spiritually, so that they can occupy or so they can engage their natures. Everyone can engage their particular natures and actually thrive in society and become, spiritually aware, enlightened as they, just are performing their regular duties, right? So this is what a Kshatriya does. He wants to provide for people, and he also wants to make sure that everyone's doing the right thing. So the Brahmanas tell him what's right. If they see someone doing something wrong, of course, naturally they'll figure out some proper punishment so that no one else is suffering, but it's all based on protection, right? And so they're more focused on creating a suitable environment for everyone's spiritual growth than punishing the wicked, right? So in other words, if they create an atmosphere where no one has to try to exploit one another, then these crimes won't even happen. So there won't even have to be punishment. So ideally, so nowadays we, administration, we think those are the people who, they're in like law enforcement and things like this and punish the people that are doing the wrong thing. But there's the whole other side of that, which is more like preventative medicine than, treating something after the body's already, all messed up. And so they want to create this environment where there won't even be a tendency for crime, right? And so that's what a kshatriya does. Their natural tendency is to protect people, to give people a situation, a circumstance in which they can thrive according to their own natures, without having to quarrel amongst each other, right? So this is kshatriya. And that's the reason that a kshatriya is put in this post of administration, because they want to provide for everyone, and they're concerned with protection, right? Then when you go lower down in the modes, you add a significant amount of ignorance within that passion. So you still have this ambition. This is called a Vaishya. Vaishyas still have ambition because they still have that mode of passion, but then there's also this mode of ignorance where they're less concerned about protection of others. They're more concerned about just being productive, potentially making something more than what they're given. They're given something small, and then they can profit from it. They can make something more out of it and then generate profit. And then there are Shudras, primarily mode of ignorance, where essentially they don't want to do anything unless they're getting something very specific in return. It's a transaction. I will do this, I get this, right? So transaction. So I've spoken about this a lot. I don't think I have to really get too far into it. But this is the general idea. So what happens when we act outside of our nature, that the modes of nature are there. When we act outside of that, if we are lower class men, posing as rulers, as it's put in the translation today, then all of society is harmed by that, because a true kshatriya, those who are meant to be in the administrative position, as I said, they will make sure that there is an environment where no crime will even need to take place. It's based on protection. They create and maintain laws based on the protection of the citizens. If a Vaishya is put in that position, whether by vote or just by, whatever, they will still do the things that the administrators do. They will still create and maintain laws, but instead of doing that for the protection of the citizens, they do that for profit, right? Because that's what they do. They have that mode of ignorance there. So they're just interested in expanding, not the protection part, but the expanding part. So they'll make and enforce laws based on what's profitable, right? So it's a very different civilization. You could see if you're living under someone that's protecting you, you feel quite safe and you'll thrive. But if you're living under someone who's trying to exploit you, then it's a constant struggle. So we see that that's an issue. And that's if a Vaishya is there. Now, if a Shudra is in the position of an administrator, which is actually most of the case, there are some Vaishyas, but mostly Shudras that are currently in the system. What they do is there are actual Vaishyas that own these huge companies and corporations, and essentially they say to the Shudras who are occupying the administrative posts, they say, okay, you pass this law and we will do this for you, whether it's we're going to give you some money or we're going to give you, a house or a boat or whatever the case may be. So it's transactional. So there are Vaishyas who are basically giving counsel, which is what the Brahmanas are meant to do based on Shastra. So these Vaishyas, based on profit, are giving counsel to these Shudras who are occupying these posts of administrators who should be Kshatriyas, and therefore the laws are just based on exploiting everyone to make profit off of the citizens, right? And so this is the danger of lower class men posing as rulers or being put in the position of Kshatriyas or even Brahmanas, right? So it may seem as if I'm talking down on Vaishyas and Shudras, even the terminology lower class. It sounds like, these people, they're terrible. They're definitely less or unqualified, right? And in one sense, they're the unqualified part, that's true. We'll get into that. But it doesn't mean that they're bad necessarily, right? It's not my intention to talk down on them and say that they shouldn't exist or they shouldn't. It's just that they shouldn't be in these particular positions, right? Everyone has their place in society, regardless of their nature, and everyone can engage in Krishna consciousness, right? Nothing holds us back. It's just modes of nature. It's not even us eternally. It's not our eternal position. It's just the current modes of nature that we're dealing with, which determines what our tendencies currently are. So everyone can engage in Krishna service. It's not a problem. I don't have a problem with Vaishyas and Shudras. The problem is when they try to engage in a Kshatriya's duty, and then it creates a mess for the whole society, not just for themselves, but for the whole society, right? So yeah, so basically Vaishyas and Shudras, and even lower, because, let's face it, much of society isn't even up to the level of Shudra. They shouldn't be in the position of administration or counsel, for that matter. They shouldn't take the position of the Brahmanas or the Kshatriyas, because not having the proper qualification, they won't do a very good job. They'll simply create chaos, right? Bhagavad Gita teaches us that we shouldn't engage in another's duty, right? We have to stick to our own. And this is because when we stick to our own duty, then we actually purify ourselves of these particular modes of nature. And then we can actually elevate our consciousness. We can elevate our position, right? So how do we identify what is our duty? How do I know what's my duty and what's someone else's? How do I know if I'm actually engaging in what's my duty or someone else's? Well, we learn that from the Shastra. Bhagavad Gita shows us how these different modes of nature affect us. We will have natural tendencies to do certain things. And so we can consult with Bhagavad Gita, we consult with our guru, we also converse with the sadhus, and we can see, okay, this is my nature, so this is what I do. So Shastra will tell us, if we use anything besides Shastra, right? This verse is always coming up. Shruti smriti puranadi pancharatra vidim vina. If we use anything besides Shastra to make any decision, whether it's figuring out what our duty is, what our hobbies are, what we eat, anything, how society should run, anything whatsoever, if it's based not on Shastra, it will create unnecessary disturbances in society. It doesn't matter what our intentions are. We could have the best intentions ever. I want to fix this problem. I see this as a problem. If I do this, it might fix that problem, so I'm going to do this. If that's not based on Shastra, it will create an unnecessary disturbance in society. We should remember also that this material world is not meant to be comfortable or even nice, for that matter, right? We notice problems, and our tendency is to try to fix them to some extent, to try to make this world a bit more comfortable or a bit more tolerable, right? But trying to adjust the material world to fit into what we deem is an acceptable, ideal social structure will always be a losing battle unless we're actually consulting Shastra, right? No matter what, because Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pancharatra Vidim Vina, if we're not following these, we are just going to create unnecessary disturbances in society. Now, of course, there is a place where there's an ideal social structure. Everyone lives in harmony. And we can absolutely go there as soon as we purify our polluted consciousness of thinking ourselves independent from the Supreme Lord, right? The spiritual world. everything is running quite smoothly. There's no conflict or quarrel. If there is something that looks like a conflict or a quarrel, it's actually part of pastime. No one's feelings are actually hurt. It's just increasing and enhancing the service to Krishna. Sometimes there's a bit of competition there, but it's never, someone trying to put the other one down and become victorious like that. It's transcendental competition that's sometimes there, but it's never exploitative. It's never like this. So it's always in harmony. So that's the society. That's how we want material society to be. But unfortunately, we're not willing to give up this false ego of thinking ourselves independent controllers and enjoyers, right? So the fact that we have this polluted consciousness, this idea that I am independent from Krishna and that I can control and enjoy separately from him, because we have that, we are here in this material world, right? And as I mentioned, this material world is not meant to be comfortable or even nice. So we shouldn't try to adjust it materially to make it more comfortable. We should try to adjust our consciousness so that we can leave this place and go back to that place where everything is in harmony. And our motive shouldn't be to get out of here, right? Our motive shouldn't be this material world is terrible. So therefore I'm going to, follow this process to get out of this material world, because that also won't help us get out of the material world, because we're still thinking that we're individually trying to control our situation of whether we're in or out of this material world, right? So our motivation should be to serve Krishna, to go back to that spiritual world. And even if we don't go back to the spiritual world, it doesn't matter. If we're serving Krishna, if we have this proper consciousness that everything even here in the material world is just part of Krishna's energy. And so if we can see it in that way, we can engage in service in this material world and it'll be just like we are in the spiritual world, right? The Pandavas, for example, they're always here in the material world. Whenever Krishna is here, Krishna comes down and he performs these pastimes. He speaks, he engages in all these other pastimes before, and then he speaks Bhagavad Gita at the Battle of Kurukshetra. This happens in all these different universes. And so the Pandavas are always there. It's the same Pandavas. Arjuna is always Arjuna. It's not a post, he's a person, right? So, but he's in the spiritual world, because wherever Krishna is, that's the spiritual world. But it's just the spiritual world in the material realm, in the 1/4 of all of creation, not the 3/4. So for a devotee, it doesn't matter actually whether they're in the material world or the spiritual world. It just matters that they're engaged in Krishna's service. Krishna's here, I'm going to serve him, and that makes the spiritual world. It's not actually a location; it's a consciousness, right? So, so that being said, the world's not meant to be a good place. We shouldn't try to correct, But of course, there is. Oh no, we did that. So even in the material world, right? So we know how things work in the spiritual world. Everything's in harmony, right? But even in the material world, we actually have a formula to make society run in such a way that everyone is happily engaged according to their specific conditioned nature. And even better, while happily acting according to our specific natures and thriving with everything we need under responsible and reliable protection, we are simultaneously elevating our consciousness and gradually redirecting our tendencies from self-centric to God-centric. This is Varnashram Dharma, right? Daivi Varnashram. It's a system that Krishna gave us to engage our specific natures. And while we're engaging our specific natures, we can elevate our consciousness simultaneously. This is a system that Krishna developed. He gave to us in the Shastra, and he says, okay, if you follow this, then everything will go smoothly, right? So since it's given by Krishna, it's infallible. If we follow the system with proper consciousness, it will work. Society will run in such a way that everyone is cooperatively contributing to one another's spiritual welfare. It's not that just materially they'll be comfortable and there won't be, we won't have to worry about where our food's coming from, where our shelter's coming from. We'll be engaged in activities that we'd have the natural tendencies to engage in, but it'll also be elevating our consciousness. That's the way that Krishna designed it, right? But since we don't follow this recommended system, we don't follow Varnashram, as pointed out in today's verse, we're burdened with extra quarrel and hypocrisy as we try to navigate our way through Kali Yuga. But there's hope. And we don't have to wait for a Kshatriya in shining armor to ride in on his white horse to overthrow the corrupt system and take control of administrative posts. We can just follow Srila Prabhupada's ray of hope advice that he gives in his concluding words in today's purport. Srila Prabhupada said, in the absence of a suitable king to curb irreligious tendencies, educating the people systematically in the teaching of Srimad Bhagavatam will clear up the hazy atmosphere of corruption, bribery, blackmail, etc. Right? So I love how Srila Prabhupada does this when he's talking about how, so we were talking about the result of when, let's see, get the words exactly, the lower class men pose as rulers. And so we talked about how, or he talked about in the purport, how that just causes great disturbances and there's all this doom and gloom. But then Srila Prabhupada points out, as he often does, that, hey, don't worry about it, because even though this situation is terrible, you don't have to wait for this to actually be done right. You don't have to wait for Varnashrama to be established. It doesn't have to be. That's not the only option. It's not the only option that, there has to be, a proper kshatriya in the administrative post, and then they can engage everyone properly. Ideally, that's how it works. And that's the only way that it'll actually work comfortably for everyone, because everyone's nature is being engaged properly. But even in a situation where that's not happening, we can clear up this atmosphere of corruption, bribery, blackmail, etc., by systematically teaching the Srimad Bhagavatam, right? So we don't need to wait for a suitable king to come around and curb irreligious tendencies. We can curb them by first educating ourselves by studying Srimad Bhagavatam, and then systematically teaching it to others. Living the lifestyle of Srimad Bhagavatam by following in the footsteps of the exemplary acharyas, and then showing by our own example how to relinquish our material tendencies and engage in spirituality, right? To return to our Sanatan Dharma, our eternal occupation. So if we do this, then we can actually counteract the influences of Kali Yuga, right? Don't have to wait for someone to actually, take over the government and do it properly. And okay, now I can engage in Krishna service. No, we can study Srimad Bhagavatam, take instructions of the Guru, follow the examples of the sadhus, and live our life accordingly. Actually live the lifestyle that's presented in Srimad Bhagavatam. And then if we do that, all of this corruption, bribery, blackmail, it's no longer polluting the atmosphere around us if we engage in this. So if we follow Srila Prabhupada's instructions here, we will become instrumental in Krishna's movement to re-spiritualize human society by contributing to the revolution in consciousness in the impious lives of this world's misdirected civilization. So, in conclusion, we should spend less time listening to lower class men who pose as rulers and more time listening to Srimad Bhagavatam. So the results of listening to both are clear. If we listen to Srimad Bhagavatam, we're listening to Krishna's words, which are infallible. We're understanding what different natures are, what nature we are influenced by, how to engage that particular nature. In other words, it doesn't matter what nature we have, we can engage it in Krishna service. That's one thing I was trying to really touch on earlier, that it doesn't matter even if we have a lower nature. if we read Srimad Bhagavatam, we can understand what our nature is and how to engage it properly in Krishna service and how to purify that nature, actually elevate ourselves, right? So this is what happens when we get our information from Srimad Bhagavatam. When we get that information, or when we get our information from lower class men who are posing as rulers, what we get is, first, we're exploited, we're taken advantage of, we're not properly protected, we're not properly taken care of. And so the results are quite clear. We can either continue to subscribe to the Kali Yuga style social interaction, social justice, social system, or we can, from Srimad Bhagavatam, understand actually how we are meant to act as a society, right? And act accordingly. And one result will be misery and suffering. And the other result will be the alleviation of suffering and actually going back to Godhead, actually re-engaging in Krishna service properly, favorably, without motive, without interruption. So the results are clear. The results of following both are clear, and the decision should be a quite simple one, right? We should see, okay, well, this one leads to, you get to one of those crossroads, right? You're going down a road and then there's a fork, you can go this way or that way. And you see the one sign says, okay, this one's going to be a bunch of suffering and you're just going to be exploited and taken advantage of. And, there's a very small glimmer of hope that you might be happy, but it's actually quite illusory. It's a carrot dangling in front of your face. You'll never actually get it and you'll die. So you can go that way, or you can go this way, which will purify your consciousness. You can elevate yourself and you can re-engage in your eternal relationship with Krishna, right? So it seems like, okay, yeah, that's a no-brainer. You go this way, you go and you serve Krishna. But somehow we have this choice, not only every day, but every moment of every day, that we can either choose to serve Krishna. So in other words, we choose to do our actions based on what's given in Shastra, or we can choose to do our actions based on what society is telling us to do, what's acceptable, what's necessary, what's, all of these different things, except, I said acceptable. And so we have this decision at every moment. And we do know, at least in theory, what the different results will be of taking these paths. But obviously, we need to bring that theoretical understanding to a higher, more applied understanding, so that we can always, not just sometimes, not just occasionally, or not even just most of the time, but we can always choose to serve Krishna. And the way to do that is to always study Srimad Bhagavatam. So congratulations to the 19 participants here and whoever else is on. Oh, now it's just bumped up to 20. And to whoever's on YouTube listening, you're studying Srimad Bhagavatam, step 1, that's good, check. And so we should take this very seriously and actually apply it in our lives whenever we can, whenever the Srimad Bhagavatam is speaking to us and saying, hey, that situation in your life and it looks exactly like this, like it's saying in Srimad Bhagavatam, you have the strength to actually, and the instruments, all the tools, to make a change in that particular aspect of your life. And it's little by little, one by one, whenever we're comfortable, and it's our decision to make. It's not that we're forced to do anything. Just like the brahmanas, they give the advice, and if you take it, that's good. If not, then so that's how it is. If the same way Srimad Bhagavatam gives us this advice, if we follow it, it's going to be really good for us and society. If we don't, well, that's our choice, right? Krishna gave us free will, and he doesn't mess with that. So it always comes down to our choice, whether we follow that or not. Oh, one other thing I wanted to point out that I forgot when I was talking about Varnashram, because we have a tendency to misunderstand Varnashrama for several reasons. no one wants to be considered a low-class person, a Shudra, right? It seems like a bad word. It's even saying that, obviously they shouldn't be in certain positions. So in one sense, the qualifications are different, right? And we don't want to be considered like that. So we have this tendency to be like, oh, no. I can't be a Shudra. Plus we have these statements that Vaishnavas are actually above the Brahmanas. So anyone that's a devotee, they're actually higher than those four, right? So the thing is this, there's ashram and there's varna. Within ashrama, which means within your family life, everyone, regardless whether you're brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyasi, right? Within your ashrama, whether your occupation outside of the ashrama is brahmana, kshatriya, vaishya, shudra, within the ashram, everyone's brahmana if you're a Vaishnava. At home means you're studying shastra. You're doing some deity worship, most likely. So within the house, you're following the cleanliness standard of a brahmana. You're doing all these brahminical things in the house. But what occupation means is when you're outside dealing with society, what are you doing, right? So within ashram, all Vaishnavas are brahminical. Outside of the household, when we're dealing with society, what are we doing? Are we transactional? Means I'll do this, but I have to get this in return. So basically, for our occupation, are we accepting a fixed salary, right? So if that's the case, then that tends to fall in the Shudra category. If that's what we're willing to. Sometimes there are situations where there is a salary, but that's not the actual consciousness of the person. They're doing the thing because it needs to be done, and they just happen to be getting the salary. But if the consciousness is, I'm not going to do it unless I'm getting this in return, that's Shudra. And it's no problem. It's just that we have to identify it, understand it, and engage that properly in Krishna's service. So in the ashram, we're Brahminical, but in our Varna, when we're engaging in that occupation, we have to understand what that is so that we can purify those modes of nature and actually elevate our consciousness. If we have a bit more passion and we don't get a set salary, but we are able to take calculated risks to possibly get more, we also could possibly get less, but we can possibly get more, then that's Vaishya mentality. So then, that we understand the nature from Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and we can deal properly. We can be engaged in a proper occupation. The Kshatriyas, as we spoke about at length, is that their tendency is to protect others. So they want to do something. They're active. They have that mode of passion, but they want to make sure that everything is going nicely. They want to make sure that everyone's protected. Not that everything's going profitably, that everything is going nice and everyone's being protected. So then if that's the nature, then they should be in administration. And if the nature is that, Krishna is in control of everything, I just want to study the Shastra and then give that to others. And, it's not up to me whether they follow or not, then that's Brahminical. So that's the occupation. So within the household, everyone is Brahminical. If we're aspiring Vaishnavas. But then when we leave and we're dealing with society, we can see what our nature is. And from Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, we can see how to properly engage that nature in Krishna service so that it becomes purified and we no longer are under control of those particular natures. And we can see this happening even within a lifetime. Some people say, well, at least, maybe in next life, I'll be in this position. Even within a lifetime, we can see that these lower modes can be purified and our natures can actually change. We can go from being a very transactional person to a person who's much less detached, or much less attached, so much more detached to the material situation like that. So we can see that. We can observe that. So I think I will stop here to see if there are any questions. I've spoken on this topic so many times that I didn't necessarily want to sound like a broken record, but at the same time, we do need to hear this. We do need to understand that when lower class men are in the position of administration, it's bad for not only for us as a society, but it's also bad for them, right? Because if they're Vaishyas, for example, they're still not going to be happy. If they're under the protection of a kshatriya and they're given range to make profit and they're being provided for, then they can actually feel satisfied. They feel like they're contributing to society and they're also getting protection, and they can be satisfied. If they're put in a position of administration, then there's no upper limit. Their greed makes them want more and more. And we know from so many stories of many wealthy people that money doesn't actually buy happiness, and you can't take it with you. So even if you have some temporary happiness that, okay, I did this and now I can enjoy, this body is temporary, right? The soul's eternal, the body's temporary. So we feel that we're going to have whatever we have forever, but in the material body, that's not how it works. The material body goes away. We can't take any of that money with us, right? Or whatever we accumulate.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Yes.
Dandavata. So your explanation for the Varnashram was very nice. So thank you for your explaining the Varnashram. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
Haribol, Prabhu. I just want to ask a question. I say we have to engage ourselves according to our Varna. What about engaging ourselves in Krishna consciousness services?
Yes, but it's still according to our tendencies. So each of us has a very unique puzzle of modes of nature that are around us. And so the way to fix that is to engage in Krishna service, but we have to engage in a very specific type of service in order to peel away those layers of modes of nature, right? So that's why it says in Bhagavad Gita that you should perform your own duty, even if it's imperfectly, than to perform another's perfectly. Because if we're engaging someone else's nature, we're not actually purifying our nature, right? So and it's not going to be satisfying to us either. But since we have these particular tendencies to engage in a particular type of work, right? The way to purify that is, since currently we engage in that type of work because it serves us, but we have to learn how to engage in that type of work so it's pleasing Krishna, right? So it's benefiting Krishna. So we learn from Srimad Bhagavatam how we can do each of these things properly to actually serve Krishna, not to serve our senses. And so basically whatever we're inclined to do because of the modes of nature, if we learn how to do that through Shastra for Krishna's service, then those very precise, specific modes of nature peel away. And then the next layer is exposed, and then we have to engage those particular things in Krishna's service. But if we just generically say, okay, I'm just going to engage in Krishna's service, and anything can be used in Krishna's service. So what exactly are we going to do? Am I just going to, let's say I'll just be a full-time cook, even though maybe I've never cooked before, but I'm going to learn to do it because someone needs to cook for Krishna, right? That's one way to do it. And it may be, it's beneficial, cooking for Krishna, obviously, but it's difficult to maintain that consciousness of, I am actually doing this for Krishna, if it's not part of our nature, right? So we'll have a tendency to, while doing this service, which has nothing to do with our nature, we'll be thinking of doing something else, right? And so that's not beneficial when you're actually trying to do something for Krishna, but you're thinking of something else. So that other thing that you're thinking of, you have to figure out how to engage that in Krishna's service, because then that purifies that desire, and then it actually then helps you, the thing that's binding us then becomes an instrument of our liberation, right? Once we learn to properly engage in Krishna service. So yes, as you mentioned, the solution is to engage in Krishna service, but we have to do that with intelligence. We have to understand what is our conditioned nature, and how can I engage in that in Krishna service, so that that conditioning then disappears, right? And then what we want is that all of our conditioning disappears, and all we have left is the purified consciousness, right? Currently we have polluted consciousness. We want to purify that all. So all that's left is pure consciousness. And then we have our eternal position as servant of Krishna, right? So that's done by intelligently understanding what our conditioning is and engaging those conditionings in Krishna service properly. Did that make sense, Mother Golopananda Priya?
I know many devotees that will say, okay, I'm a Brahmana, I know I cannot clean, I'm doing like sutra service. I cannot clean, I cannot put in this position of cleaning all the time. And another thing, they said, oh, I'm a Brahmana, I cannot go out and work and earn. So there's so many different excuses, in the name of Varnashrama, I cannot do certain services.
So yeah, if we're using them as an excuse, then that's not good. But if it's actually our nature, so the reason Brahmanas generally, obviously Brahmanas clean, they're cleaning the altar, they themselves are very clean. So it's not that they don't clean, but there are certain areas where a Brahmana shouldn't be, because he has to perform deity service. So if he goes in a place that's super contaminated, so there is something to that. But that being said, there is also this phenomenon where people can use it as an excuse to get out of something. So the point is yeah, and it's difficult to judge whether someone's using it as an excuse or if they're actually legitimately just trying to follow their nature. So it's best that we keep these things for our own, in other words, to judge ourselves, to find out where we are and to figure out how we should be acting, if that makes sense. Mukti Datri Radhika Mataji, did you want to add to that, or you had something else?
Yes, Prabhu. So I wanted to share our one experience, because we are born in a Brahmana family, but my husband also the same, but they don't really follow all the rules and regulation for the eating and eating prasadam and all. But when we came to US for the first time, then my Prabhuji used to do a government job in Bangladesh. So he was a civil engineer in our country. He was working as the gas department. But when we came here, so we came into one of our uncle's friend's house. So they were trying to put him in a work that they cut meat, all the time. So yeah, so when he went there, and the guy, whoever we came to, so he was forcing him, no, you have to do this, you have to do this, because you have to take care of your family. You just came, whatever job you available, you can do it. So he was very upset. He never cut anything, he never killed any animal or anything, but he used to eat, but he never cut anything by himself. So he was really upset, and he was praying to Krishna. And then he got the job for the first time as a housekeeping job. For some time he did, and then after he found the job as a produce junction, there was only fruits and vegetables and flowers. So he was really thankful for that. For his nature, he doesn't want it to go to the slaughter, work and do this kind of job. Just I wanted to share this, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. And then also the Shastra points out that although birth in a certain family is certainly one of the contributing factors, because our birth is dependent on our previous activities. So if we're born in a Brahmana family, then there will be a tendency that we will at least have the potential to become Brahminical. But we don't actually determine caste by birth. We determine it by quality, by qualification, right? So the Shastra says that even if one's born in a Shudra family or even less, if they have the qualities of a Brahmana, then they are accepted as a Brahmana. And if someone's born in a Brahmana family, if they have the qualities of lower, then that's how they're accepted. So it's not just, although it is it is a factor that we can look at. Birth isn't the final factor that we judge that on. But thank you for sharing that. Sita Devi, you also had your hand up.
Yes, but okay, well, I'll just go for it. There is what you said was very, very informational, and it was very good for me personally to hear everything you said today. I do get I like to get a little bit more clarity on this, because I do think about it a couple times. But Prabhupada, he was everything. He was Brahmana, he was Kshatriya, he was based on circumstances and need. He would clean the people who would come, he would clean after them, he would clean his clothes, he would do so yeah, that's a little bit more discussion on that. That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. Thank you for pointing that out. So he wasn't all those things. He was transcendental to all those things. That's the first thing, because these things are based on the modes of nature, and he was quite transcendental to those. So he could do the needful and just engage in whatever service was needed, right? And so for us, sometimes that's absolutely necessary and quite beneficial. But at the same time, since we do actually have a conditioned nature, Srila Prabhupada did not, right? So he didn't have to purify those things. He just did them because that's Krishna's service, so he did it. So sometimes we are to do that. There are festivals that come up, or there are other opportunities where this is just something that needs to be done, and you just happen to be here, so can you do it? Doesn't matter what your nature is, or what you just do it, right? And so we can do that sometimes. The problem is if we try to do that all the times, then we're trying to imitate Srila Prabhupada, right? And it doesn't work out for us, because we actually have conditioning. Now, the more we purify our conditioning, the more we can engage in those things outside of our nature, because we know this is just Krishna service, so it's fine. But it's not something that we can sustain if we don't actually purify our conditioned nature. So that's why it's necessary. That's why it's important. So ultimately, yes, we can. Any devotee can do anything. Ultimately, once they're completely purified. But until we are purified of that, it's in our best interest to most of the time, not all the time, most of the time, engage our nature in Krishna service, right? Properly, because then that'll actually take away that conditioning. So to whatever extent we can just do the needful, then that's good. We can do the needful.
I also see that as purification. So many times I feel like, oh, that's just not me. I just can't do that. And then I find myself in situations where I have, okay, if you don't do it, then it's not getting done. So I'm like, okay, I got to do it. And then I'm, putting in extra effort, because it's not simple for me. It's not easy for me. So I have to put in extra effort. I have to come out of my comfort zone. I have to, because it's not easy for me, So then I also see it as purification in those moments where, you're challenged and you're like, oh, just do it, So yeah, well, anyway, thank you so much for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, it's also important for us to come out of our comfort zone from time to time, because then that shows Krishna that it's not about us, it's about Krishna, right? So that's also a very important thing to do from time to time, or even as long as we can. It's a strange thing because the way I have to word it, it sounds like it doesn't make any sense, because we have to step out of our comfort zone as much as we comfortably can. So it sounds like you're not stepping out at all, because I'm using the word comfortable again. But we are. It's just you don't do too much, because if you do too much, then what happens is it's palgo vairagya. In other words, in theory something is true, and so you just go for it, but you didn't actually have that much faith. You just you had some faith, but not enough to actually deal with the repercussions of now. I'm still thinking of these things that I gave up. So did I really give them up? No, I absolutely did not give them up. I just, gave away the physical thing, and now I'm always thinking about it, right? That's Falgo Vairagya. So we have to know when we can actually step out of that comfort zone, how much faith we actually have. Do I have faith that if I give this thing up, that I'm no longer going to think about it anymore, and that it's just actually engaged in Krishna service? Or do I have, the amount of faith where I'm going to give it up and then it's going to haunt me later? So it takes a bit to understand when we can do these things, and we will make mistakes. I've done Falgo Vairagya so many times, but then I've also learned how to do proper Vairagya. Right. So when we can successfully do that and engage these things in Krishna service, because it's not giving them up, it's giving up the mentality that they're here to serve me. Right. So you keep it while you're attached to it, but you change that mentality. You make sure you change that mentality, though. It's not just that you're using the excuse. That's what happens a lot as well. We're like, hey, it's Yukta Vairagya. I'm just using this thing, whatever it is in Krishna service. But is your consciousness changing, or are you actually considering that yours, right? And are you enjoying the benefit from it, right? Even with food, right? If we're only preparing things that we like for Krishna, right? We're preparing things specifically that we like for Krishna, and that's all. Then that's not the ideal situation. We should find out what Krishna likes and cook for him, right? So that's a more subtle example of that, but it shows that we all have these tendencies, and they can be subtle or they can be gross, but we shouldn't. We have to make sure we don't fall into this thing where we're calling something Yukta Vairagya, but actually we're just using that as an excuse to keep enjoying the thing. No, we have to have the thing as long as there's an attachment to it, but learn how to change that consciousness. Once the consciousness is changed, then whether it's there or not, it doesn't matter to us, because we're detached, right? So if it's an activity that's not so favorable in Krishna service, but we were able to use it, then we give it up and we pick up something else, right? But if it is useful, then we continue to use it. But that consciousness has to change. That's the main thing. And like as you mentioned, Srila Prabhupada would do these services that you would say they're Shudra things, because he's like cleaning up and things like that. But he's not doing it with that transactional mentality. He's doing it because that's service to Krishna. So it doesn't mean because you're sweeping that you're a Shudra. If you're sweeping because if I don't sweep, I don't get my food, that's Shudra, right?
Yeah.
So it's the consciousness. It's not the activity. But the activities can also follow. There's a reason why the activities go with the particular consciousness, because they help purify. The Kshatriya, they need to protect, and they also need to be active, right? The Vaishnava is Paraduka Duki, right? So they also want to protect, but they don't necessarily have to expand. They don't have to build anything up. They don't have that motive passion. They will if necessary, but they don't have to. So better to find someone whose nature that is to expand and build up, and better to give them counsel, advice on how to do that properly, right? So we just have to have enough intelligence to know, what our consciousness is when we're dealing with things, and how to properly redirect that consciousness from self-centric to God-centric. And that's all of the Shastra. That's all it's showing us to do, is to take ourselves out of the center, realize that Krishna has always been the center, and then act accordingly. All of our service revolves around him, not everything revolves around us, right? From self-centric to God-centric. So that's all Shastra is telling us to do in very many different ways. right? And so it's just our consciousness that has to change, if that makes sense. But doing the needful is definitely necessary from time to time, but we have to know how often we can do that without burning ourselves out. Is that
Right, absolutely. We have to have the desire to change. We have to know where we are, and we have to have the desire to. We have to strive to be better, and keep trying on that path. And I know Krishna helps us. So, thank you.
yes? Thank you. Anything else?
I don't see any more hands up. Thank you very much, Prabhu. I mean, you broke down so many different things, breaking up that varnashrama and clarifying all of those things, that within a varna we are. When I listen to you, I understand everything. And then when I have to repeat it, it all goes away. But there were a lot of things that got clarified today. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for yesterday also.
My pleasure.
And then we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Jai. Thank you so much. Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you.